Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Hirschhorn. I'm the CEO of Ish Entertainment, which is a non-scripted production company in New York. And more importantly for today, I'm a co-founder of GreenlightGO, which is an online platform that connects producers to hundreds of specialized facilities and solutions to support their shows. We started GreenlightGO in 2019 because we saw a transformation coming to how TV and film was produced. And that rollout was complicated by COVID, but also created some real new business opportunities and accelerated the macro changes that have been happening in the business that we had been anticipating. So that's what we're going to talk about today. It's really a profound moment in the business and a huge transformational moment in the business where things that we thought might take 5 to 10 years to happen basically have now happened over the course of 2020 and into 2021. I wanted to thank Alex Kress from GreenlightGO for taking the lead on this project and helping put everything together. And also a thank you to our partners and co-hosts, APA, which all you guys know about, a fantastic agency. It's one of the largest talent agencies in the industry. And I'm going to read this because this is what they sent. Their physical production department represents international and iconic studios and production services for film, television, streaming, and commercial content worldwide. Additionally, this division is at the forefront of navigating the careers of myriad producers, cinematographers, production designers, editors, first and second unit directors, costume designers, visual and special effects supervisors and coordinators, digital creature designers, and stunt coordinators across all media platforms. And Anthony Morato from APA here in New York has really done a fantastic job pulling all this amazing talent that will be on the panel today together. And then lastly, but very much not leastly, the Broadcast Management Group, BMG, which has been a partner of GreenlightGO and a client, is a full-service media production company with experiences in all phases of content creation. BMG is an industry leader in live production, broadcast consulting, production staffing, creative development, and event managing. And Todd and Andrew, who are directing me right now through this really fantastic platform, we're very grateful to you. So today we're going to have two phases of this session. We're going to be talking with Jake Fuller and Melissa Morcus, who are production executives and producers. Jake Fuller is a producer at the wildly prolific Jax Media, whose credits include Emily in Paris on Netflix, Search Party on HBO Max. I really want to talk about the ending of season 4, but I know we're not allowed to. And Broad City on Comedy Central. And Melissa Morcus, who's the director of production at the equally prolific E1 Television. Melissa was previously manager of production at Marvel TV and co-producer for the 3rd season of Daredevil, the 2nd season of Cloak and Dagger, and the 3rd season of Jessica Jones. So really what we want to talk about is how is COVID-19 impacting physical production, production space from a production executive level view, including kind of more in the weeds questions around square footage needs, ventilation requirements, technical infrastructures, cleaning protocols, et cetera. But really to pull out as well, because what a weird year it's been, and what have we learned, and how have we changed, and what are the things that are never going to go back to the way they were in 2019. So I want to welcome Jake and Melissa, and get your point of view on how your world has been rocked, and how you guys are swinging with the punches here. So welcome, guys. Jake, please take it away.
Oh my God, what an insane introduction where you're like, ask all these giant questions about production, and then they're like, go ahead. Yeah, it's been a weird year. I think there's been, as you sort of alluded to, there's been a lot of changes that were already sort of trending in our industry that now have been expedited. A lot of trends in visual effects certainly, I feel like, have been solutions to a lot of COVID problems. And because of that, people have leaned more into them. And then, just navigating sort of how to keep people safe in what has been a really scary, crazy time for a lot of people in the world has been really interesting and frustrating at times. And I also think that it will leave us with sort of healthier, safer practices in our industry moving forward, which will be a nice side effect of a really strange time. And yeah, what else?
Well, I guess just what's been the weirdest experience from a production point of view in the last year? Like, what has been the most surreal kind of out of body tech forward situation you found yourself in?
Well, man, that's a really hard question to answer. It's funny to think back to March when we all thought like, okay, we're going to shut down, but it's probably for 4 or 6 weeks. Like that feels so dumb to even say now. Uh, and yeah, so it's been a moving target. It started with like how and when can we start back up, and then our industry really came together to say like what protocols do we need to put in place to start back up. And so summer was a really exciting and weird time last year to say like what are these protocols and how do we do it. And we had productions that were all remote, and we were shipping people equipment around the country, and people were filming themselves, and we were using platforms like this one to tell people how to record themselves and coaching people through lighting themselves in their own house. Uh, and then finally, when fall rolled around, finding a way to actually get back on set and finding a safe way to do it. And it's been a really challenging year, but I think that it's I felt a sense of camaraderie in our industry, in like us being like, guys, how do we do this? We all need to figure out how to get back to work. So that's been really fun.
Great, and I'll come back to you on some more detailed questions in a second. But Melissa, how about you? How about you?
Yeah, okay, I'm in the hot seat now. So yeah, it has been a crazy, crazy year for everybody. I actually started at Entertainment One 3 weeks before the pandemic hit. So I think anyone starting a new job, especially in production, around the time of March last year, it's difficult. It was a struggle. I luckily had a few weeks in the office to get adjusted and get to know people before we all were introduced to this new work from home life. So this past year has been a huge learning experience. And to Jake's point, production has always been number one priority is keeping cast and crew safe. But what COVID has done has increased that to a whole other level. It's added a whole other level to our jobs in terms of health and safety now. And between the testing and hiring health and safety teams that are now comprised of 10 to 20 people that never even existed before March of last year, and the PPE requirements and the sanitizing teams and cleaning teams, it is a whole other level that no one, I think, could have ever predicted. So it's been a huge learning curve. We're learning day by day because, as we all know, things change pretty constantly now. So it's definitely keeping us on our toes. For anyone who works in production, it's been a crazy year.
So, in terms of just as an example, let's say an episodic episode of scripted television. Does it take more days to produce it now than it used to? What from a budgeting point of view is different, and from a planning point of view is different when you're contemplating a season of scripted television?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what we've done with our shows is we've tried to scale back the hours. So, instead of doing a 12-hour day, we're trying to do a 10-hour day. Maybe on locations, we'll do 11 hours instead of 12 hours. So, when we scale those hours back, we've essentially added an extra day of work to each episode. And, some shows are doing a little bit different where they're keeping with the 12 hours, but sometimes still need that extra day because of all the extra time it takes for COVID protocols to make sure things are wiped down, sanitized before using them, whether that's props or set deck or, and then making sure cast is removed from set safely in order for whatever zone to come in to do their job. So all of those things add up and take a lot of extra time. So every show is a little bit different depending on where they are, the crew size, the cast size. But overall, it definitely is adding time to production. So I would say most shows are adding at least a day to an episode.
Great, Jake. How about yourself?
Yeah, I think we're seeing the same thing. Sort of a day an episode is pretty normal. Beyond that, though, like prep is extended it's so much harder to get the protocols together to make sure you've figured out a safe way to shoot it with, with the network and with the studio, following safe way forward guidelines, working with your ADs, your location department, like. So in addition to adding roughly a day an episode to a half hour, we're also seeing like what used to be able to be prepped in 4 weeks is now an 8 week prep. So it's it's sort of more difficult throughout.
Right. And you had mentioned the safe way forward, which probably many people on this Skype are aware of, but maybe not everybody. And it sort of goes to the question of, well, safe way forward, if I may not represent it correctly, but it was the unions, studios, and the distributors working together to come up with an initial set of protocols that they came up with last summer, and I think has since been modified over time. Is that now basically the gold standard, and you guys all have to follow that, or have there been different approaches?
That's the gold. That's the gold standard. We
If
all.
if I was a proper TV host, I would have prompted one of you. But yeah, maybe Melissa, go first.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That is what we do have to follow. And what's laid out in the Safe Way Forward are the basic principles. So it does, in terms of testing, in terms of zones, you have to have a health safety supervisor, a COVID compliance officer. All of those things are fluid, and they're on every show. So it does then, once you have those core principles and core protocols, it depends on what show, where that location is, how big your cast and crew is, and you tweak more detailed protocols from there. But it is a standard across the board. All companies and shows are following those core principles.
Great. And Jake?
Yeah, it's sometimes when you like those are the core principles that we need to follow as signatories to the U.S. guilds, right? So if we're producing TV shows in the U.S., for sure we're following them. When you start to produce in other countries, they have their own set of protocols that you have to follow. And in most cases, the Safe Way Forward protocols are more strict than countries' protocols, and so you end up defaulting to those. But it's constantly saying like, okay, here's the framework, which is the Safe Way Forward that we're building around. And then we're adjusting to the specific project we're doing based on creative needs or based on where you're shooting it.
Cool. And then Jake, I just wanted to follow up on something you said earlier about using animation special effects more. Is it getting to the level that it's changing the types of projects that are getting greenlit, or are you looking for technical solutions to existing shows to execute them in different ways?
I think it's both. I mean, I'm not a buyer, so I can't really speak to like how people are deciding what to greenlight, but I'm hearing sort of anecdotally that people are, if there's certainly in March when there were like some shows that animate people like development slates that had animation on them, people were like, let's fast track those. So I certainly have been hearing that more shows have been greenlit that are easier and safer to shoot, and there's certainty around when they can shoot them, and a lot of those are animation projects. On a practical production level, I think that a lot of the VFX are solutions to crowd sizes mostly. But I'm doing a movie right now that's shooting in Toronto. It's all about Indian weddings, and it's supposed to be these big groups of people coming together. And it's a difficult thing to shoot safely right now. And so we're talking to a lot of VFX companies about using CG crowds or tiling crowds, where you sort of shoot crowds in pieces in a safe way, and then you comp them together into one shot. And so it's both.
And is your sense that technical innovation, I'll start with you, Jake, that technical innovation has really ramped up in response to COVID in a way that you think is going to continue in coming years?
I would assume. I don't know for sure because I'm not deep into the technical side of things. But I think that our industry is made up of people that are problem solvers, and that's what we do as producers: is solve problems. And there's no bigger kick in the pants than being like, you can't shoot unless you can figure out a safe way to shoot this. So I can only imagine that it's propelled technical advances in our industry.
And then how about on your end, Melissa?
I absolutely agree. I think technology, this was the year for a huge boom. And I think a lot of shows like Mandalorian maybe helped kick that off. They're using companies like Lux Machina and they're building volume sets where you can create these worlds that involve very little crew members to help manage, as opposed to building things practically. So technology in terms of using the LED screens to reduce some crew. I think that more and more people are looking into those type of options. And as Jake mentioned, I also have a show where there were a couple scenes where we needed to sell being in a very large crowd. We can't do that now. It's not safe. Our cast doesn't feel safe having hundreds of background around them. So you're limited to a small group of background. So having VFX options that can help populate bigger groups to help sell a larger crowd or sell a condensed area is really key right now. And I know a lot of VFX companies are improving that technology daily to help number one be cost effective, because not every show has the ability to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on VFX. So having a cost effective way to do it, and also a pretty quick turnaround time, because especially in TV, we don't have months of prep. We have to shoot a scene next week that we had 8 days to prep for. So turnaround time and being cost effective are two things that I know VFX houses have definitely amped up on and helped us a lot with.
Yeah, that actually was my next question. Between some of those requirements and some of the COVID compliance requirements, what's happening to the per episodic costs of scripted TV?
Yeah, there's a huge cost now to, COVID in general can add anywhere from 10 to 20% of your budget, but that's for all costs COVID related. When it comes to specifically, if we are talking about a scene where we can only have 50 background, even having 50 background now in COVID, you're now having to test all of those background performers, give them testing stipends, make sure there is a separate holding area, which involves more space, more footprint, and all of that tied into your daily cost with COVID. It's a huge, huge impact for production.
Cool. And Jake, on your end?
Yeah, seeing something similar. It can range between, we're seeing like 12 or 15% across most shows. Certainly smaller shows, because there's a lot of fixed costs associated with COVID. Like, normally our industry works like there's a sliding scale of rates. So if you're a small show, the rates you pay people are less than if you're a larger show. That doesn't really exist for a lot of these COVID costs. A lot of the compliance officers have the same rates. The testing costs the same per test, whether you're on a big or a small show. And so we're seeing that smaller shows are hit disproportionately hard by the COVID costs. So yeah, somewhere between 12 and 15. And yeah, as Melissa outlined, it sort of there's a huge ripple effect across the entire production.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly find on the non-scripted side that buyers are like, "Here's the money, make it work." Is it similar on your end, or are buyers understanding that they need to spend more money, or to what degree are they pushing that back down on you guys as producers, Jake?
The studios and networks and buyers have been really great, for at least in our experience. They are asking us sort of to meet in the middle. So it's like, if we're making an episode of TV that was going to be $2 million, they may ask us to make it slightly cheaper, but then all the COVID stuff would be on top of that. So it's not like we're not making the same. Everyone is sort of like, hey, we got to acknowledge there's a lot more costs here that it's going to be impossible to swallow. So in most cases, the costs are on top of what our normal episodic would be.
And how about you, Melissa?
Yeah, same exactly. With COVID, unfortunately, that's not something that can really be negotiated or scaled back on. The costs are what the costs are. I can't go to a lab and negotiate testing rates. It is pretty standard what these costs involve now, and it is a significant amount. And with our network partners, everyone has been fully supportive of knowing that there is a huge extra cost, and we just need to accommodate if we want to continue shooting.
Cool. And how do you guys make a decision about what's the level of protection needed? Presumably, you guys go out to bid, and somebody comes in cheaper or more expensive. It's from an ethical point of view, it's a really tough decision to make, and sometimes you're making a kind of blind decision. Jake, I saw you nodding your head.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really tough to figure it out. A lot of these compliance departments that we're building are made up of people that have never done this job before. So it's all of us figuring it out in real time. And people are getting certified to be safety officers in one way or another, and that there's not a lot of our job. A lot of the hiring and decisions we make around how we spend money are based on reputation, and there's just not any data on reputation for a lot of this stuff. And so it sounds to me like everyone's going through the same thing where you're in a place and you try out a lab and the lab isn't turning around tests in time. And so you need to change labs, and you have a safety officer that isn't getting it done. And so you need to change safety officers. And it is tricky. You can't just say like, oh, we get 3 bids and we go with the cheapest one. You really have to kind of dig a little bit deeper, and everyone is just trying to figure it out in real time.
Cool. And then just since we're getting close-ish to the end here, things like writers' rooms, post, and so forth. How have you guys adapted, and what kind of impact has that had from a creative point of view? I'll start with you, Melissa.
Sure. So all of our writers' rooms are virtual right now. And I know that has been a struggle for our writers' teams. It's not easy. I know usually a writer's room, you bond very quickly, and there's a lot of collaboration that happens. And yes, we have different platforms where they can use Microsoft Teams or Zoom, or there's a few different writers' options that helps that collaboration process continue, but it's not quite the same. So I know everyone is doing their best. We have seen maybe a little bit more time needed for some of the writers' rooms just to accomplish the same thing as before pre-COVID. And then in terms of posts, we also have posts completely virtual right now. So they're all working remotely from home. There's no post-production office, and editors are also working from home. So it's a new workflow that everyone's had to adjust to. So to your point, it's not just production, it's creative, it's writers, it's posts. Everybody has been affected.
And are there kind of off-the-shelf solutions for that, or are you guys ever kind of having to kludge that together and sort of make it work for yourself?
Yeah, our post team has done a really great job of trying to find, different technology and resources that we can use to make this a seamless process. So there's definitely those apps and technology where we can do color timing remotely, where our showrunner can, log into a certain system and in real time give notes, whether it's with editorial, even sound mix. We're trying to figure out a way to do that now. So there definitely are opportunities and resources that our post team have found that are proving to be somewhat effective. It's not the same, but it is working at the moment. So yeah.
Cool. And then how about for Jax?
All of our writers' rooms are virtual, over Zoom or some other platform, and as Melissa said, it's a little clunkier. I've heard sort of from some writers though that they can get the same amount, like maybe the days aren't as long because there's less just sort of messing around, which I think bums out the writers. It's not quite as fun, but it's exhausting to be on a Zoom call for 8 hours, and so that ends up being a 6-hour workday or something. But a little clunkier. We are mostly virtual for post. We do have 1 or 2 shows that are in person right now, and we have to follow the same protocols we would on set for those productions. And I think the virtual solutions, whether in the writer's room or during production or in post, have come a long way in the last year. Honestly, like a couple of the shows that shut down that we're trying to post in March, we're having a ton of lag issues, and now have been sorted out. Just by necessity, those workflows have been streamlined, and so I think we've come a long way in the last year. And if anything, I feel like it's going to help our production in the long run, having the ability to do these things remotely. And it used to be that we couldn't hire an editor if we were going to post in New York. Now I think people are open to it. Even if a showrunner is in New York, if it's a great editor that has to be in LA and is not willing to travel, I think we're open to it now because a lot of the workflow issues have been sorted out.
So I think you slightly answered my next question, but I think it's reasonable to think things will go back to something approximating normal in the next 6 months. What reverts and what stays the same? That's for Jake.
Man, I don't know. I have no idea. I think that a lot of these meetings that used to be in person will become virtual meetings. I think that we are open to working with people remotely. I'm working on a bunch of productions now where the accountant is not in the production city, right? So things like that become possible. I think that the at least early stages of prep are all done over virtual meeting rooms. The things that go away are probably the testing and the PPE, the size of the compliance teams. I could see like a compliance officer being kind of morphing into from a COVID officer to like a health and safety officer, and that being something that sticks around. Um, but I think the biggest thing is the ability for people to work remotely, stick around.
So you don't think there's a hunger for people to go back to being in a shared space?
I think there is for sure things like writers' rooms, you know, director's cuts, the director sitting in a room with an editor. There's not going to be a good substitute for that. I just think that having the ability to do it opens up what's possible. Whereas we used to say like, okay, we can't have this writer because this writer happens to be in the UK. I think now we say like, okay, everyone can meet in a room, but then we can conference in this one writer, things like that. So not so
Yeah.
I yeah, I don't think it's ever going to be all remote. I think there's no substitute for in person, honestly. It's just a better way to make something is to be sitting in a scout van with all of your department heads. But I think having the ability not to do it that way will open up other possibilities.
Yep. And how about you, Melissa?
Yeah, I don't think in 6 months we're going to wake up and everything's going to be back to normal per se. But I do know that, once we can get through COVID, once, we are in a place where we don't have to test people to the extent we're testing people. I know crew can't wait to just go and high five each other. The simple things of not having a mask cover half your face and not being able to recognize your friends. I know those things, everyone is very excited for those things to come back. I think to Jake's point, there's no substitute for in person. There's another level that you get to having those in person meetings and conversations. And I know a lot of people are excited to revert back to that. But to Jake's point as well, it has opened up a whole new way of approaching things, and these new technologies and resources and systems we put in place will make it easier in some aspects just to give us more options going forward. So I
Right.
think that could be a good benefit for us in the future.
And you guys presumably have missed the frequent flyer miles.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely traveled less this year. I was able to travel to one of my shows, basically wrapped in saran wrap, but definitely less travel this year. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I saw some report that said that some version of COVID may be around, for as long as 7 years. So I'm thinking possibly that these protocols, sort of with less fear, these protocols will probably remain in place for quite a while. So, guys, really wanted to thank you. I learned a lot. This is the scripted world is not one I know a lot about, and so I feel 100% smarter than I did beforehand, and I'm very grateful for your time. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for having us. Really
Thanks.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you. So I wanted to introduce our next panelists, who are really come from more of an indie and film perspective, though not exclusively. Three more amazing panelists: Alex Bach, who is a partner and executive producer at Irony Point. Alex's most recent film, Scare Me, which is directed by Josh Rubin, premiered at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival. And on the TV side, Alex was an executive producer on 2 Netflix series, Astronomy Club, the sketch show, and the brilliant and weird and haunts my dreams, in a good way, I Think You Should Leave, with Tim Robinson. And I hope there's going to be more of that to see. Charles Miller, who is a New York-based producer. His most recent credits include Mother Android, written and directed by Mattson Tomlin, and the fantastic Trial of the Chicago 7, written and directed by, you've heard of him, Aaron Sorkin. And then our third panelist is Jamie Buckner, who is a New York-based producer and production manager with nearly 2 decades in the industry and has had recent projects premiering at both the Toronto International Film Festival and Tribeca Film Festival. So welcome to everyone.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks for joining, and yeah, I'd love to start the way we started the first panel. And what has been the weirdest, most jarring experience of the last year from a film and TV production point of view for you guys? Alex, I'll start with you. Welcome.
Hi. Well, definitely just joining panels like this and seeing Jamie and his mask. I'll never get used to it. But let's see, what has been the weirdest thing of the last year? I think, I work now largely in the comedy space, which tends to have kind of lower budgets, and definitely just, I think, the sticker shock for studios and finance, basically anybody who's paying for these shows and features is kind of the biggest shock that we've had. It's totally doable to produce stuff in COVID, but it's, on the lower budget side, as Jake was mentioning earlier, the markup on the lower budget shows are, it's a lot greater to account for COVID.
And Charles?
Been a lot of new things to learn, that's for sure. I didn't think I'd ever learn so much about HEPA filters and air changes per hour, and we used to just go into locations and make sure there wasn't lead, and then there wasn't any lead, we'd be good. But now there's so many other things to consider, and it's just very interesting for sure.
Yeah, and Jamie, I appreciate. I feel safer knowing that you're wearing a mask.
It's funny. I'm in a production office now on a studio feature, so it's you just gotta, it's as much about optics as it is about actual safety, just making sure that you're leading by example. But yeah, most challenging thing. It's funny. Yeah, all the things obviously echoing what Alex and Charles both said. To me, it was sort of like having 5 months is what it was for me. I don't know for anyone else, of just sort of like, we're so go all the time. Like I often refer to film people, movie, film, TV, feature, whatever people, as we're adrenaline junkies. And so to go from having all of that adrenaline pumping and all the problems to solve and all the fires to put out all the time, to having 5 months around my house just like staring at my dogs, wondering what was going to happen with the world, and then just jumping right back in and doing what we all know how to do that was never easy in the first place, and now it's gotten twice as hard with all the extra hoops. That's been the most challenging thing, I think, is the roller coaster of transitioning from like wild and crazy, possibly the busiest New York and the East Coast has ever been, to nothing, and then sort of getting right back into it in this whole new way.
So, Alex, has COVID changed the type of projects that you guys are pitching, the type of projects that are getting bought? What directions has this taken you in?
Yeah. Well, let's see. I definitely think overall, buyers are going for more of the sure bet, like obviously Marvel shows will always continue to go on. You'll be happy to hear we are in our last kind of week of shooting season 2 of I Think You Should Leave, which had a great first season. We we do have some animation on our slate that's finally seems to be moving forward. Um, I think that what we're seeing kind of like big picture is just the sure bets, like the crowd pleasers, the ones that, buyers know everybody wants to see. Those are the ones that are kind of like in first position. We have a couple of shows that were sold before COVID hit, and then the writing was kind of taking place during COVID. And then we were like, okay, here are these brilliant scripts. And some of the feedback was like, we love these, we can't wait to do this, but we can't afford to pay for COVID. So, call us in a year.
Yeah.
So,
Well, let me drill down with you a little bit on I Think You Should Leave. So how from a production point of view has season 2 been different from season 1? What have you had to do differently?
Well, on that show in particular, we were 3 days into shooting this season, and then basically COVID hit, and everybody kind of pulled the plug on all productions, and that was one where I'd say, like, from a production standpoint, it should have been very similar to season 1. And then there was sort of a lot of starting and stopping as we were kind of trying to figure out, like, what do these COVID budgets look like? When is it safe to go back to working? On that show, we have a really, really, the whole team is brilliant, but we have a really amazing line producer, Jay Padamanawan, who did the first season. And he kind of came up in that, like, Nathan For You kind of APSO scrappy world. And, we had some really hard choices we had to make between, like, do we resume production during COVID, or, knowing that we have to make a lot of, like, real budget compromises for budget purposes. And Jay, really, and let's just put it this way, it wasn't a blank check to just do whatever we had to do to get it done in COVID. We have other shows where it was like this, but this particular show, we had to be really smart about it. And what Jay came up with was basically like a plan where he looked at the entire body of sketches and kind of put it into 3 buckets. And so the first bucket, or the first shoot week when we resumed, were like tiny, tiny sketches that could be shot with a skeleton crew. Like, we're talking no more than 15 crew members on set, no video village. I couldn't even be on set. It was really like essential people only, no background, just like the very easy, simple sketches. And then we had a week down. Week 2 became like the slightly more complex. We grew the crew a little bit. And we had slightly more background, more performers, whatever. And then our third week were the sketches that are, have background, have stunts, maybe have animals or minors or whatever. You've seen that show. It's not like we're not having a crowd of 300 people. That's just not the show. But certainly it requires an audience for Tim. So that, I think, was just like all the credit to our line producer. And knock on wood, it's been going great. So we just have our last kind of big stretch ahead of us, and then, it'll be in the can.
Great. And thank you. And Charles, how about you in terms of work you've been doing over the last year? What has been practically different because of COVID from previous work that you've done?
Well, the Mother Android film was a COVID movie. We did that last fall in and outside of Boston. So that was something that we weren't in full prep on, but we were planning to do in the spring. And then when COVID hit, we hadn't really started spending any money yet, but we then were just kind of all talking weekly about, okay, when it's time, how are we going to get this back up? So we kind of targeted August, September, and that's where it ended up sticking. A lot of the challenges were that, I'm sure with Alex's show, same kind of thing, that since we were sitting and waiting to come back, we kind of started doing things before the majority of shows were back. We were one of the first shows to start prepping and shooting in Boston again. So we were we were going off of the white papers, and then the Safe Way Forward came off, so we had to, take a pause and update our protocols to match the Safe Way Forward document. And then 3 days before we started filming, the Return to Work agreement came out. So we had to be like, okay, hold on. Here's everything we're doing. Here's the updates in the Return to Work agreement of the items we may not be doing, and now we have to scramble and figure out how to adhere to those so we're in compliance with SAG and DGA and IATSE and the Teamsters and all the other various guilds and unions. So it was challenging being, I think, one of the first ones back to kind of deal with how the protocols were changing almost every day, and how we were navigating all these new companies that were jumping into this space of COVID compliance and testing, and trying to figure out how to do it and how to vet these companies properly. We ended up going through, I think, and I think this is kind of a common thing across most films, but we ended up going through 3 labs before we found one that we were satisfied with. We went through 3 different companies that were providing us with our health and safety, compliance officers. So it was a constant struggle to kind of figure out, as we dove back into it, how to actually adhere to all the protocols. But um, I think what was really important was that it was a Miramax film, so a studio film, and we had the support from them to figure it out. We weren't put in the box of saying this is how much money you have to make the film. Figure out COVID inside of it. We were able to kind of, as things changed, make changes to the plan and understand, like, this is a new cost of business.
For sure, and so it's understood that those burdens will be shared by the production and by the studio, or it's sort of a constant negotiation.
I think it depends on who you're working with, but we're in a situation where the studio was very supportive, and they didn't want the creative to be affected by the COVID costs. So we obviously, we didn't. It's a little bit of a give and take, right? They were like, all right, we want to make the movie a little bit cheaper than we had planned to, but it wasn't like, okay, for the same price, now fit COVID inside of it, because we're learning so many things as we went. There is no, how do you properly budget COVID when you'd never done it before, and there's no examples of or cost reports to review or references to check about how it actually went. So they were very understanding and supportive of that, and they had the infrastructure to put that kind of support on top of the production costs. I think what a lot of independent films are struggling with is, when you're not backed by the infrastructure of a studio and your money is entirely based on either borrowing against the tax credit or foreign pre-sales based on your package, the money you get back, the money you're borrowing is the money that you have. There's nothing, so you are forced to look at the script, look at the creative, look at the production costs, and in order to make the film, you really have to make sacrifices, because there isn't an aggregate in those models that says, okay, if the actor and the director is worth this much, then we're going to add this much percent to that for COVID. So.
Yeah, and let me just drill down a little bit on Mother Android. What does a set look like? What does a production office look like? Is everybody in Boston? How does that work?
We the production office, we just had to find a bigger space, more individual offices than your traditional, like, big bullpen area, and costumes all in their one room, and art department all in their big kind of one large room. So it was more about, like, finding a new space with a layout that worked to keep everyone in more individual spaces. A lot of, like, weird Zoom meetings where you're all in the same building but talking on the computer. We let accounting be remote. You know, things like that in prep, where the only thing that was kind of weird was that we were all in the same place but talking to each other on our computers when we could hear each other through the walls.
Right.
And then in the shoot, what I think I found was that the idea that your zone A can be like this very small 10 to 15 people, it just didn't really work. um, it, because you can't have one grip in charge of all the grip equipment. Like if something happens, the rest of the department has to come in. So we did. We kind of had like we just felt like it was more important to keep the majority of our crew tested 3 times a week rather than having those 10 to 15 people who would be present when the actors masks were off be tested 3 times a week, because we just needed that flexibility for people to come in and make adjustments. If something went wrong, we didn't want to be handcuffed to not be able to fix a problem. So it we really like what we didn't anticipate, I guess, was essentially testing more in order to be safe, which I guess makes sense, right?
And so you were able, by testing more, to have a bit more of a porous set, in the sense that if you needed people from different zones to interact, or people to be able to go home at night, you were able to pull that off.
Yeah, we basically, what we called it was like a active zone A and inactive zone A. If the actors' masks were off, then it was straight like lockdown. It couldn't. No one else could enter unless you were absolutely needed to be there, and we were able to keep that very small for the most part. But it was more when the actors weren't present, allowing Zone A and Zone B crew to interact as long as they were properly wearing PPE and distancing when possible. So it was more
Understood.
about
And
that
yeah.
line of like when Zone A wasn't activated by people not being able to wear PPE, as long as everyone was in PPE, because Zone A and Zone B were being tested 3 times a week, we let them kind of interact with each other.
Understood. And Jamie, can you speak to that as well? Obviously, it sounds like you're either in pre-production or production on something right now. What is that like, and how is it different from your previous experience?
Well, it's interesting because, like I said, this is studio. I can echo a lot of what Charles said. You have the infrastructure, you have this large sort of corporate entity that, and again, as was hesitant to say, and as I would be as well. Of course, like you don't get a blank check, but you do have a large corporation behind you saying, like, yes, of course, be safe. Also, we want to make the movie possible, which is different than, also similarly, it was more of an indie experience for me in the fall, and we were some of the first people back because we were lucky to sort of like have independent financing, and it was like, okay, if you think you can do it, then go. And it was what he was referring to a degree, not quite as much, because our investor was terrific and basically did say, whatever you need to do for COVID, we trust you. But there was only a set amount of money, and the interesting addition I would say to that is what hasn't quite been solidified, and I think has, but certainly early on wasn't clear, was there's the different contract thresholds for things like SAG in the indie space, like what your rates of what you end up ultimately having to pay your cast and things and your crew and all of those things are based on like what your budget level is. But does the COVID additional costs count towards that threshold number? Does it not? What portions of the COVID costs count toward the threshold number? What don't? So it's sort of like it's this weird dance of what box do you have to work within, but also trying to be as safe as possible without compromising the project. Um, so the indie space and the studio space during this time are similar but very different at the same time. And I would also echo something that Charles said in a little bit of a different way, not in a different way, but the testing, of course, because you get on the set with Zone A and Zone B, and everybody thinks it's everybody wants to be in the VIP club, right? Everybody thinks that they're important enough that they have to be near the camera all the time. So they want the yellow wristband. They don't. What do you mean? I have to be on set. What if something happens? And so you do have to sort of like, as great as all those documents are, you have to sort of create the system again, right? You have to say like, okay, so there's zone A, B, and C, but also there's we did a similar thing, but we called it B plus. And so it's like if you're B plus, and you may have to run in sometimes when there's cast around, we'll test you 3 times a week, but you're still technically zone B. And so we do like, zone A, B, and B plus, and C across the board was just C and never really came in. They'd be like your run drivers and things like that. And so it's an interesting new way to work. And as much as, I mean, look, it took a lot of time to put these, safe way forward and thing documents together, because it's a really intricate process. And then we've all gotten back in and tried to put it to work. And there's things, of course, as we all knew, we find that just aren't realistic. And the thing about it's funny about testing and testing people more is I can't tell you how many times I've had to explain to crew members because you're of course balancing everyone's individual like how seriously are they taking this virus? How there's a whole spectrum of like people who like barely want to leave their living room, and there's people who think it's not a thing. So you have to sort of balance that. And so there's so much of that spectrum that you have to navigate. And then people are like, well, I'm being tested. And it's like, well, right, but testing is a monitor. It's not a preventative. Washing your hands, wearing your mask, social distancing, those are preventative measures. Just because you're being tested, it's funny, I had a conversation with someone about this earlier on from like, I think on Amazon, they make you test every day. And it almost makes people more reckless, like when they go home, because they think that it's a preventative thing. It's not a preventative thing. It's just a monitor. So, yeah, just a lot of ins and outs, right?
Yeah, it's funny. This has been a great window into human psychology, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Jamie, what do you think remains and what goes away when, I think my sense is that some version of COVID is going to be around for quite a while. We're probably a few months away from things just moving out of the terror zone and into the sort of management zone. What changes? What stays the same?
Well, I think the masks are not going anywhere for a while. Like I think we're just we're all just going to be a culture of wearing masks more frequently than not. I think social distancing will loosen up, but that's going to be around for a while. I think there are elements that are. Well, it's funny because I think we are going to adapt. I think remote work is going to become, as was said earlier, I think remote work is going to become much more present, and that's across the world in every industry, including ours. I think remote work is going to be a lot more acceptable, and that's going to be something that we're really going to lean into. That's very helpful. I have no practical use of this currently, but we have been utilizing 360 pictures for location scouting and location information on this project, and I think that ultimately, if there's some smart company or dozen companies or whatever that's really good with VR. I think VR scouting is going to become a big thing. VR pre-visualization of set building is going to become a huge thing. So I think there's certain things that'll go away. I think we are going to have to continue to get in 15 passenger vans and start doing scouting safely. I think we'll just be more conscious of the ventilation and the windows being open and how many people are in that van and things like that. But I do think there's just certain things you can't avoid having people together in the same space to talk about a project. Like you can't shift it all to remote. You can't do remote scouting. So I think there's certain things like that that are going to adjust back to the old way. But I also think there's a lot of innovation to come because people are going to want to be safer. And and it's funny, people keep saying like in a few months. I think this is around for several years. If you keep reading all the science, I think there's going to be some version of this around for quite some time. So it's good that we're learning to adapt. Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint right now what exactly will stick and what'll kind of go by the wayside. But I do think we're going to get back to more not fully the way it was, but there will be more in-person meetings and scouting and things like that. I think we're going to have to shift back to that because it just like it slows the process down and just really does hurt the product to not have people in the same space talking about a project.
Right. Also, wearing pants may come back as well. That's
right.
Also a Alex.
Yeah.
Alex, how about on your end? What changes? What stays the same?
Yeah, I mean, definitely masks, remote work. I don't think that's going anywhere. I think that I hate to say this because I just love independent film so much, but I just think it's going to be hard for a while for indie films that have pretty tight budgets to get back up and running because it's just such a lot of times finding financing for an independent film is so hard to begin with that I think a lot of the films that we're going to see coming out are all going to be ones, probably from streamers, which is just, it is what it is. I think that I agreed kind of with what Jake was saying previously about like just a lot more prep. I think now planning is going to be just more important than ever. For me personally, like I definitely have a higher expectation for my director's prep because they have to do all the prep and then communicate with all the department heads in advance, which they always had to do. But now it's like, there's all of these COVID considerations that go into it. So I think just like a focus on prep is going to be just a thing that hopefully stays. And beyond that, I also agree that probably there will be a permanent health and safety position, maybe something that's even like, IA. And yeah, those are the big things.
Sure. And how about for you, Charles?
Well, I think it's when the vaccine kicks up, once that happens, and the testing, at one point testing will go away, which will be very helpful for the independent projects, because that's one of the biggest hits to the budget is the testing. So once we can vaccinate more people, and people can provide vaccination certificates or something when they come to work, so they, whenever that's safe, that's going to be a huge help. I mean, the things that I think shouldn't go away and should stay around is any sort of prevention techniques, because back in the day, 6 months ago, right? You could be on your deathbed with like 102-degree temperature and you're going to work, right? So that kind of pressure to go to work when you're sick, I'm glad that it's been lifted. And if, our crew members, our cast members are sick, it totally within your right to say so and stay home. There's no reason to risk getting another 100 people around you also sick. So, anything that we're doing now and we're learning to prevent spreading disease doesn't have to be COVID. It could be anything. So, if you don't have to be 6 inches next to someone talking to them, you can stand 3 feet apart. It doesn't mean like high fives and hugs go away, but prolonged exposure to someone in close conditions when you're not feeling well is just not a smart thing to do. And I hope a lot of us are learning ways to integrate these techniques into our just normal lives.
And is it your sense, and picking up a little bit on what Alex just said, the changes in indie film financing and distribution, some of those were already happening, right? That they were being kind of gobbled up by the streamers. Is COVID just accelerating that trend, or is COVID just sort of a blip in the sense that it's sort of burden your projects with expenses that are just make it harder to execute these films? I guess, Charles, start with you.
I think it's accelerated the process for sure, because you need to be able to go and seek financing that's not as rigid as borrowing against a tax credit or foreign sales numbers. Like you need to go find equity. You can't be borrowing it against a bank because of all the challenges that COVID brings. I mean, I'd say you can. It's just much more difficult. So I think that's why you're seeing that streamers and studios have the flexibility to push their projects forward, whereas a lot of the independently financed projects are slower to get back. That doesn't mean they'll go away, but it just means that's more of a challenge for them to get up right now.
Cool. And Alex, what just to finish that thought that you had started before, is this a cyclical thing, or is it just sort of accelerating the trend that had been happening before March 2020?
Well, I certainly think it's accelerating the trend, but I also think that there's just like the reality of it's like, what we haven't really talked about is just sort of like COVID also has coincided with kind of like an industry-wide reckoning of, wanting to support new BIPOC voices. And so I think that there is a level of indie film is how emerging filmmakers and creatives traditionally have always kind of found their voices and proven, that they are kind of the next generation of filmmakers. So having said that, I think there's like a budget level that like, I just don't know if I would ever go to a streamer for a film that really should be made for $1 million or less. So having said that, like, I don't think indie film is gone for good. I think as long as people have a will to make art and make film, that, they will find a way. But I do think that we are still very much in the I think pre-vaccine, we're going to see a lull in independent films that don't have, big studios backing them. I just think that's how it is. So, to summarize, yeah, I think any film will continue always. I think streamers, are whether they're financing it or buying it on the back end. I mean, I do think it's the goal for most filmmakers for distribution, but I think right now, if they're not buying it on the front end or it doesn't have a big star attached, that we're gonna have to wait a little while.
And then we'll finish up with Jamie. What are your thoughts on this? And then we'll close out because I'm told we're almost out of time. But we may have lost you.
I'm sorry, there's like things buzzing around me, so I mute myself on and off. Sorry about that.
No worries. Now I can hear you now.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I would echo a lot of this. And what I find incredibly interesting with so many things these days, and in like COVID, and I've always thought this, our industry is really just sort of a funhouse mirror of society in general, right? Of what's going on. And I think what Alex is saying and what we're recognizing is that the divide is just becoming not only larger but more solidified. You're either making a movie for under 5 million, or you're making a Marvel movie for 100 million plus, or like the next Will Smith movie or something like that. And a lot of that, again, as with the virus, as with all things political and whatnot, there are marginal communities that are disproportionately affected by these changes and by everything that's happening right now. And thanks to Alex for bringing that up, because it's something that should be front of mind for all of us. And that's the sort of thing that, people in our position, Alex, Charles, myself, and anyone who has the sort of privilege to be in a power position like that really needs to sort of, we have to focus and keep those things straight. The trend is it's been more rapid. The trend has been sort of like accelerated, and these things are becoming deeper. But we have the ability to sort of like pick and choose projects and hire accordingly, and make these things not as affecting as they could be otherwise. But yeah, absolutely, it's sort of, and that's been the trend almost since I started in this business, where it's sort of like the middle budget movie is very difficult to get not only finance but just to make, and certainly to make money back on once it comes out into the world. So there's the model where you just spend as little as you can and then try to sell as high as you can, or just have such a bottomless pit of money that you make a movie so cool that it's going to make $1 billion at the box office. And it's the scrappy people in the middle that are really not unlike, not to get too cheesy or middle or like political about it, but not unlike the middle class is kind of going away.
Yep. No, I think that's a great point, and I think a great note to end on. I wanted to thank you guys so much, Alex, Charles, Jamie, and I want to thank our partners, BMG, who did a fantastic job producing and directing this, and APA, and the folks at GreenlightGO, which is our platform that matches production needs with production supplies around the world. And then we've been really doing a terrific business. I hate to say it because of COVID, but because of COVID, it's just opened up an entirely new market, and it's a service we've been privileged to provide to folks. So thank you all for being with us, and hopefully we'll get to do this again, and everyone stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody.